So I wanted to thank the UIKonf team. I think this conference was fantastic. I don't know what you think. What do you think? How was this conference? It was great. Give it up for the team. Thank you. And for the technical team that makes all of our slides look so good. So that's really good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great work. So yeah, I went a bit fast. There you go. We're going to have a small, very cool, very quick review of 11 years of iPhone from a developer's perspective, because we are developers. So I wanted to thank also of being, that I'm very happy to be in the city of Berlin that actually celebrates so much programming languages that they put them on graffitis on walls. It's fantastic. I think it's a great, great thing. Although I would have chosen 2 different languages and go and forth, but that's a personal choice. Apple has a long, long tradition of mobile devices. Not really. Well, there was a first try. It didn't quite work. I started working on the iPhone as soon as it came up. We were a bunch of people, very crazy people in Switzerland that we met every so often to talk about Objective-C and the iPhone back in 2007. And then things got up very quickly up to there, and now I'm here. So you can see as things go very fast. I'm a lover of this platform. I really, really love working with iOS. So in this presentation, there will be lots of anecdotes, and I hope you will enjoy them as we go forward. And of course, everything started in 2007 like this.
These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. And here it is.
One of the people in the room that day was Alan Kay. You know, Alan Kay is a legend in our field, and he basically explained to Newsweek a couple of years later about this being in that room that day, because he had talked about the Mac being a computer worth criticizing at a point. And it turns out that this Steve Jobs came to him at the end of the presentation of the iPhone to ask him, is this phone worth criticizing? And Alan Kay, very interestingly, told him to make the screen 5 inches by 8 inches. Keep that number on your mind. Okay, not everybody was actually very ecstatic about the iPhone.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
There you go. That was what a smartphone was for. A smartphone was for email, basically. That was a big thing back then. But Jobs had bigger plans. Jobs was actually talking not just phones or iPods, which were very popular back then, but the whole new category called post-PC devices.
Well, anyway, I think there's just a category of devices that aren't as general purpose, they're really more focused on specific functions, whether they're phones or iPods or Zunes or what have you. And I think that category of devices is going to continue to be very innovative, and we're going to see lots of them.
Give me an example of what would that be?
Well, an iPod was a post-PC device. A phone is a post-PC device.
And this was the last recorded meeting between Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. Of course, that was in 2007. And what got me hooked with the idea of the iPhone was that it was running what it was called back then, OS X iPhone. This was exactly the name that Apple was giving to this operating system, which meant that inside, deep down, we could have made our own apps using Objective-C. I was a .NET developer by day, but in the nights I would write Objective-C on my Mac, because of course there was not such a market for Objective-C developers, at least not in Switzerland. So WW 2007 appeared in the scene, and what we got was not quite what we expected. I don't know if you remember, but the first kit to make apps for the phone, interestingly, was web apps using Web 2.0, you know, everything that was very fashionable back in those days. Of course, people didn't quite buy the idea, but thankfully we had Joe Hewitt. Joe Hewitt, who was very well known because of Firefox and Firebug, he created IUI. Who remembers IUI? This was the first, there we go. This was the first framework available to make HTML apps for your iPhone that basically looked like the iPhone, and then they expanded that as well with skins on CSS, because this was pure web technology for Android as well. The iPhone went on sale on June 29th, and by all standards, it was a fairly underpowered machine, by today's standards at least, fairly underpowered machine. Okay. Is it me? Sorry, it's me. Sorry, I moved too much. It was a fairly underpowered machine, as you can see. And basically, we can define OS X iPhone 1.0. Yeah. Hello? Hello? Yeah? Do I continue with this one? Yes? But this one works? Oh, no. OK. So basically, we can define OS X 1.0 by the things it didn't have. And the list is over there. I won't go over that. But you can see that it was fairly underpowered. In August 2007, I signed up for a very cool, innovative service called Twitter. I don't know if you've heard about it. And through Twitter, I discovered that Justine Zarek, iJustine, well-known podcaster, had received her first AT&T bill.
I have an iPhone, and I had to switch to AT&T. Okay, that's wonderful. Well, I got my first AT&T bill. Right here. In a box. Let's see what's inside here.
300-page of AT&T bill containing all the communications he had done on 3G, or no, there was no 3G, of course, it was GPRS back then with the first iPhone, during the course of 1 month. So the business of mobile applications didn't even exist. The business of mobile services had to change dramatically as well. The sales of iPhone picked up really quickly. They sold like 1 million in just about a month, 2 months more or less. And Time declared the iPhone to be the invention of the year 2007. But developers wanted more. So remember Cydia, Ponage tool? It all came up more or less at that time. Erika Sadun started blogging a lot, talking about how to use these tools and build applications. So at some point, well, there was an official SDK announcement. Steve himself put a note on the homepage of apple.com saying, let me just say it, we want native through third-party applications for the iPhone. So that was a big step forward. But that's how 2007 ended for developers, basically, with iPhone's sales topping 1.1 million. In 2008, we have finally the iPhone SDK in March, but that's okay, it's not a big deal. And of course, there's the announcement of the App Store, which was a big deal. The Marvel Cinematic Universe started as well in 2008. We have the first 2 movies that came out. And here's the proof that this was the name given to iOS back then, OS X iPhone. This is a photo from WWDC 2008, which sold out in 2 months. These were the good days. You could actually buy a ticket, and you had time to actually decide if you wanted to pay with this or that card, or maybe with a bank transfer. Steve Jobs was ecstatic. It was the first WWDC that I could attend. I went with my wife. It was a great trip, and basically, he explained the basic characteristics of this new market. And this new market, this App Store was inspired by the game market. Game consoles had this kind of verification processes, which was quite revolutionary and very controversial. And to a certain extent, it still is. The adoption rates of the iPhone SDK were quite high, of course. It was very popular. And Scott Forstall started his custom of having almost an hour of demos. It was quite unbearable, I gotta say. And every WWDC that I attended, we had that. The first version of OS X iPhone 2.0, again, basically can be defined as well by the things it didn't have. And it's very interesting because if you think about it, the first iPhone and the first iPhone SDKs are prime examples of what Dave DeLong explained this afternoon about the second law of magic, really of having the latest, the smallest possible choice. And basically, it was extremely popular in spite of that. And it inspired a whole generation of developers to create incredible apps with really very little under their hands. There was no core data, no unit testing. There was no send test for iPhone apps. You could somehow use a framework created by Duncan Davidson, who works here in Berlin now, called TestKit or something like that. That kind of worked with iPhone apps, but it wasn't very, very good. But what we had was a brilliant, and who remembers this bug? Somebody must remember this bug. There we go. A massive memory leak. If you used too much this API, which, I mean, I'm pretty sure most apps would use it, you would have incredible memory leaks. And finally, what you most developers did was to unlock in it manually their apps. The iPhone 3G was announced as well in 2008. Same specs as the original iPhone, but 3G plus GPS. We'd opened the door to a lot of location-aware apps. This was really, really new back then. I don't know if you remember, somebody released the 1000 I Am Rich application. That's right, I didn't buy it. But the guy sold 7 copies, apparently. 7 or 8 copies, must have made around, I guess, more than $5,000 apparently. The application was taken out of the store either by Apple or by the developer. We don't know. If he's watching this, this video, maybe you can send me a message and tell me the whole story. There was a very big problem in that WWDC. We had an NDA that lasted for, I kid you not, 3 months. During those 3 months, we couldn't post any kind of question online of any kind. There was no blog post. Nobody was doing podcast. It was silence radio around anything that had to do with the iPhone SDK, which was a problem because there was this nifty new website called Stack Overflow that just started on 15th of September 2008, which coincidentally is the same day of the Dow Jones crash, right? It was hard times back then. I was organizing with a couple of friends the first iPhone conference in Geneva. We almost got sued by Apple because, of course, we had the iPhone name on the title. They didn't like the idea. The first book ever published on the subject of iPhone development was the eponymous iPhone development by Jeff Lamarche and Dave Mark. Incredible book. Many of us in our generation started with this book. A small startup called GitHub started offering services, might be useful. And we end up 2008, excuse me, with 11.6 million iPhones sold, total cumulative sales 12.7. In 2009, again, Joe Hewitt comes back with 320. Who remembers 320? 320 was probably the best large framework/library, because it was hard to define, offering incredible toolkit with lots of different things that you could use in your app, extracted from the Facebook app, where Joe Hewitt was working back in the day. 2 ex-employees from Yahoo launched a startup called WhatsApp. Maybe you've heard about it. Palm wanted to get into the game because this was really hot. So it was an ex-Apple employee who had worked on the first prototypes of the iPhone who went to Palm to start WebOS. A small company in, I think it's Canada, Nitobi, started working on something that was called PhoneGap. You could make cross-platform apps using web technology, something like that. And I created a small nifty tool called Nip to Objective-C that landed me an article by Erika Sandler herself. Comes WWDC 2009, second one that I could attend, and it sold out in 1 month. Things are speeding up. The renaming of OS X iPhone, it became iPhone OS without an official announcement, but basically that was the new name that everybody was giving to this operating system anyway. We got a lot of useful frameworks. We got a lot of like Core Data, MapKit, and GameKit most notably, and the announcement of the 3GS, which is really the first hardware improvement on the lineup of iPhones. A very interesting device, very strong sales, very popular, and supported until 2014. Extremely long life for such a device, almost 5 years. Ryan Dahl created at that time, more or less, a library called Node.js. You might have heard about it as well. And Luke Wroblewski wrote a similar article that basically defined a whole generation of design around iPhone apps called Mobile First. And we have Tweety 2.0 released in September 2008 for the first time with a feature called pull down to refresh. This application will become later bought by Twitter and basically destroyed by Twitter. We end up 2009 with 20 million iPhones sold more, and we accumulate sales to 33 million iPhones, and there are 100,000 apps on the App Store. It's quite amazing. Enter 2010, of course, the release of the iPad. This is the latest big product introduction by Steve Jobs. And we had an interim release of iPhone OS 3.0. For those who remember, 3.2 brought gesture recognizers and universal apps, plus all the toolkit required to make split view apps on the iPad. CNBC published a documentary about this economy, because you have to remember that there was a Dow Jones crash that I mentioned previously. The economy was toast. And basically, app making was the only segment of the economy that was actually doing good. So of course, NBC got interested to all of these geeks making money, because nobody was making money back then. But remember the name, Planet of the Apps, it's going to come back. Samsung released bad app, who cares? HP bought Palm, which means that Palm WebOS became HP WebOS, something like that. Adobe and Steve Jobs weren't doing so well in terms of relationships, so Steve Jobs wrote the thoughts on Flash. This made a lot of noise, and there was a very controversial change from April to September 2010 of the clause 331 of the App Store Developer Agreement. If you remember, the clause said before that you should only use documented APIs. The addendum that came then was that the application should be written specifically in a set of languages authorized by Apple. This was very controversial. This limitation was lifted anyway a couple of months later. BlackBerry bought QNX, an operating system for real-time devices, which was usually used to send probes to Mars or to pacemakers, but BlackBerry decided it was a good idea to put it on smartphones too. The third movie of the MCU universe was released, and we got WWDC 10, which was the third one that I attended, and this one sold in 8 days. Things are speeding up, isn't it? iPhone OS got officially renamed as iOS back then, and it was a super incredible major release. We got pretty much the shape of what is today the platform that day, particularly the day they announced ARC, the automatic reference counting. There was an ovation, a standing ovation. I was telling Jeff this morning, a standing ovation of 5 minutes, people crying, people saying, for God's sake, it was impossible, you know, like all developers, like, I cannot believe what I'm seeing. I kid you not. This was true, they were crying. I mean, people have such a reaction. We got lots of new frameworks, core text, event kit, really cool stuff to build. And for users, it was great because we had also a new iPhone for the first time with a front-facing camera, which meant that finally we had a Star Trek class device in our pockets. We actually could call Scotty. They couldn't beam us up. And that was a problem, and I hope Elon Musk will do something about it at some point. The iPhone 4 has been supported until 2014. And it was well known because of the antenna gate. You might remember the antenna gate. Steve Jobs trying to explain that it was not a problem strictly reserved to iPhones. But basically, in any case, by September, Apple had to recognize that there was a huge problem, a huge backlash in the press. And they gave a free bumper to all the iPhone. Anyone who got the bumper for the iPhone 4, raise your hands. Lots of people. Very good. A podcaster that does photography, released a video, a very nice video, about making a photo shoot using an iPhone 3GS.
Hello? Yeah, this is Lee. I'm really not interested. Thank you very much. I'm in the middle of a photo shoot right now. Yeah, I need my camera back. Thanks.
Basically, that's what happens. For the memories, very popular open source libraries back then, at least ones that really got a lot of press, JSON-Key, the ASI HTTP request, and Apple registered officially the trademark. There's an app for that there was an advertising that you might have seen about.
What's great about the iPhone is that if you want to check snow conditions on the mountain, there's an app for that. If you want to check how many calories are in your lunch, there's an app for that. And if you want to check where exactly you parked the car, there's even an app for that. Yep, there's an app for just about anything, only on the iPhone.
This also, I show it because it's a very nice showcase of what UIKit was until 2013, right? And by that time, the word app was so popular that the American Dialect Society registered it as a word for the dictionary. Now, the interesting thing is that Steve Jobs I found that Steve Jobs had been using the word app since the times of the NeXT computer.
Here we are at the NeXT computer, and we want to look at two things. The first, of course, is what it's like to actually build a mission-critical app, and we're going to do that here.
There we go. This is a video available on the internet. A couple of guys released a very nice application you might have used. It's Instagram. It's actually quite cool. And basically, Microsoft released Windows Phone, whatever. By that time, Android was releasing like 300,000 phones per day, and all of a sudden, everybody realized that there was a serious competitor in town. And we end up 2010 with 40 million more sold iPhones. They are selling like 73 million pieces in total, 300 apps in the App Store. And we go to 2011, where for good or for worse, we got the release of the Mac App Store. You know, they took the idea somehow to the Mac, kind of works. A developer called Mike Lee, many of you maybe know him by heart, had this great idea that if you wanted to make movies, you should go to Hollywood. And if you want to make apps, you go to Amsterdam. So I think that actually the idea worked better for Berlin, if you ask me. But that's something that is not to me to judge. Lotsys, for those who remember, in 2011, they started suing individual iPhone developers. I didn't got that because I wasn't doing any in-app purchase. It was a huge problem about the in-app purchases on the phone. There was a patent, and apparently the developers had to pay for that. Nobody knows exactly, outside of Apple, how this whole story ended up. A small company in St. Petersburg called JetBrains, you might have heard of, released the first edition of AppCode, the first IDE competitor to Xcode, if you want. They also released the same year a small language called Kotlin. Adobe bought the company that was doing PhoneGap in Canada. Remember, they gave the code to the Apache Foundation and they renamed it Cordova. And this Cordova actually pisses off a lot of people who speak Spanish, because Cordova is written with a B, not with a V. For some reason, they chose the wrong name. Again, more movies for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Dab Dab 11 came. This one sold in 12 hours. Things are really heating up here. This was the CD release. The most important feature released for this edition of iOS was Siri, of course. There was a music app, and iCloud, which replaced the ill-fated or badly publicized Mobile Me. A couple of new frameworks, like always, every year, and storyboards, our good friend storyboards. And with storyboards, we got another feature, which is merging storyboards on Git. Apple was running their own advertising network called iAd. The initial price to get in was $500,000. They reduced the price to $300,000 at some point that year, and HP shut off WebOS because whatever. The iPhone 4S was released. This was a very, very nice speed bump to the device. It was a very capable machine, and of course was at the beginning the only one able to run Siri, but it stays, at least according to Wikipedia, the best-selling iPhone ever produced, and it was supported until 2 years ago officially. A developer named Eloy Duran developed a new project called CocoaPods, later taken over by Orthotherox. Some of you have the chance of knowing him personally. And CocoaPods is also the favorite component framework, management framework of Dave DeLong as well. And this is an internal joke between the speakers. I will tell you tonight in the party. Unfortunately, well, Steve Jobs passed away that year, and his very controversial biography was released as well in October, and we end up with 72 more million iPhones being sold that year. That takes the cumulative sales to 146 million, and there's 500,000 apps on the App Store. 2012, it starts with Objective-C being named the language of the year by the TIOBE Index. I don't know if some of you follow that, but seriously, it was kind of a surprise because Objective-C was a language that historically had never gone beyond the 130th position. And it tells a lot about the popularity of Objective-C, taken, of course, by the iPhone. We got the release of the first iPad with Retina display, and well, they had to lower the prices once again because not many people were signing up, I suppose. Facebook buys Instagram with a very large amount of money. I don't know, like $1 billion or something. And because people want to release more mobile platforms, Firefox released Firefox Os, another movie of the Avengers, of course. And we go to WWDC 2012. That's the last one that I had the chance to attend, which sold out this time in 1 hour and 43 minutes. iOS 6 has a couple of new features. It was not by all means a very memorable release. It was more than bug fixing than anything. A couple of new frameworks. However, it is remembered thanks to the maps, which, well, there you go. Also, Swiss people remember iOS 6 very fondly because Apple decided to copy the iconic clock that you find in all the train stations in Switzerland. And of course, the Swiss people, they don't like that you play around with their clocks. So at some point, there was an agreement. Somebody pays somebody some amount of money. Nothing is really well known about what happened. The thing is that this clock disappeared from iOS a couple of releases later. The iPhone 5 came up, first iPhone with 4G capability, and this one was supported until last year. To replace the aging AF networking, we had this new library AF networking. This morning we were talking about Matt Thompson. Pete Steinberger was talking about Matt Thompson, and this is one of his greatest creations ever. And here we have a 5-inch times 8-inch tablet called the iPad mini being released exactly in October 2012. And I guess that Alan Kay was really happy about that. There's a Retina MacBook Pro. That's exactly the model that I have right here next to me. And the release of the Lightning connector, which is the big change because the 30-pin connector was used since the times of the iPod. We end up the year with, again, large amount of iPhones being sold. We reached almost 300 million devices sold. And in 2013, once again, Objective-C reaches the top spot in the TIOB rankings. And it was the year of the controversy. Because it's the year that we all learned how to write skeuomorphic. And I defy that you write skeuomorphic without missing a few vowels here and there. Somehow this became the word of the year. And of course, not everybody agreed. Samsung released a platform called Tizen, whatever, and BlackBerry 10 somehow, I'm surprised they're still there. There's a company that released a framework called Ionic, and there were more movies of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like 2 per year. It was really crazy. WWDC 2013 came up, and it sold out in 71 seconds. So just to put a little bit of context, the thing was getting really crazy. I remember that I saw the tweet. I didn't go to 2013, but I remember that I saw the tweet, registration open, and I didn't have time to actually take my eyes back on the screen to see that there was a sold-out tweet being retweeted 1 million times. Very, very fast. iOS 7, the biggest feature, of course, is the change of the UI idiom. This, you like it, you love it, or you hate it deeply. There's no middle ground. It was extremely controversial, but that's the defining feature and the signature, the visual signature of iOS today comes back from those days. Lots of new frameworks, incredible amount of new features, including the beloved NSURL session, and there's support for base64 encoding in NS data, the hiding of MAC addresses, dynamic type, speech, utterance, and many other things. But visually, we have the change from Helvetica to Helvetica Neue, which was also very controversial in the design world because apparently it's not as readable. Well, still trying to seduce customers. They really wanted people to sign up, so they reduced to $50. And there was a first movie about the life of Steve Jobs released that year with Ashton Kutcher. Very bad, seriously, I don't like it. The iPhone 5S is the first device that doesn't come only in white or black. We have gold. And of course, people loved gold. And it's the oldest device still supported today. Even the gold one is supported today. And we had the iPhone 5C trying to somehow also provide an iPhone in cheaper form for other publics, which came in lots of different colors as well. We had the release of the iPad Air. I didn't have a picture for that one. And very impressive adoption rate for iOS 7. By December, 78% of all iOS devices were running iOS 7. Very, very impressive. And of course, lots of sales of iPhones, and you just don't count anymore. 2014 is the go to fail bug. That's basically what dominated the year 2014 in terms of code, pretty much not only because of iOS, pretty much every software thing on earth had to be updated because of this copy-paste, very badly done at some point. Facebook bought this small startup of 2x Yahoo employees for like 16 billion, insane, more movies of the MCU universe. And DubDub14 inaugurates what we have today, which is the lottery system, okay? So basically, unfortunately, I know many people that have applied to all the lotteries and still didn't get there. Try again, maybe one day you'll get there. 2014 is the year of Swift. The announcement of Swift during DubDub is clearly the highlight of the whole presentation, and iOS 8 was, in general, a tremendous release in terms of new frameworks and new features. It was a very nice fine-tuning of iOS 7. A lot of things that visually didn't look very well started to actually take the shape that we know today. The amount of frameworks I'm just enumerating here, but maybe those that remain more are healthy than HomeKit, which should take a bigger space as we move forward. It's also known as the extensions release of Xcode, because we had extensions for pretty much anything. An iOS app could contain extensions for anything like iMessage, content blocker, audio units, or notification screen, and so on. IBM and Apple signed a partnership, again that year, sorry, not this one, that partnership. And basically, IBM started using Swift very heavily to sell enterprise software services to big names, which actually marks the entrance of iOS into the enterprise space. iPhone 6 being released as well. First time that we have so big, an iPhone that is so big, it's actually a phablet. It becomes very, very popular. It has incredible specs. It's a 64-bit CPU, lots of RAM, very nice device, but it bent. That's the biggest problem of the iPhone 6, of course, back then. The release of the Apple Watch, of course, and Apple Pay are back then. And we have two regrets that year, very interesting ones. The first one, Balmer.
With hindsight, are there things I'd do differently? Of course.
Like what?
Come on, Charlie, I probably would have started us doing hardware earlier so that we could have been more effective in the phone business.
Yeah.
I mean, this is kind of like an IQ test. Should Microsoft have a position in the phone business?
Yes.
The two most profitable companies. We were the #1 most profitable company in our business for a long time.
Right.
Two guys have passed us, and they both did it by making phones, Apple and Samsung.
There we go. So that's the first regret. The second regret is from Apple itself, because basically they put a song so they had to actually regret it at some point. But as Graham Lee said, the collaboration of Apple and U2 goes way, way, way back. Graham, if you're watching, we love you. Carthage appears as well that year, the first alternative to CocoaPods, and interestingly, the adoption rate of iOS 8 is way slower. Why is that? Because you needed 5 gigabytes of free space to install iOS 8, and it turns out that people were taking, photos like crazy and having music like crazy. You would never have 5 gig free. So that was a problem that was thankfully solved in the following release. Swift jumped immediately to the top loved languages in the Stack Overflow survey that year already, and we end up the year with lots of iPhones sold. We accumulate more than 500 million devices sold in all of its history. And we go to 2015, Facebook releases a small framework you might have heard of called React Native. And it's the year of the big rewrite. All the libraries that were in Objective-C start to be rewritten in Swift. All of your code, all of your applications, you were all migrating them to Swift, because that's the thing we were all looking for. And the second biography of Steve Jobs was released that year as well. We have 2 more movies of the MCU universe, of course, and WWDC 15 happens as well. Lottery, remember, it still happens like that. And that was the year of the announcement that Swift was open sourced, which wouldn't happen until December, but it did happen eventually. iOS 9 9 brings interesting new features, particularly for the iPad. It becomes a really interesting software operating system to build applications on top of, with very interesting multitasking features, and iCloud Drive and Swift 2, of course. We changed the font. We get finally San Francisco, and Apple publishes an Android app. That year, Apple published an Android app to help users migrate to iOS, and because of the sales of the Apple Watch, Apple becomes the second biggest watchmaker in the planet, right after Rolex and right before Fossil, Omega, Cartier, Citizen, and many other Swiss brands up there. The iPhone 6s and 6 Plus are very well remembered because they feature this thing that nobody uses with 3D touch. And we have the release of the iPad Pro and the pencil and the keyboard and the whole thing. The iPad Pro is an impressive machine geared to business customers and somebody who wants to have a very lightweight laptop. The usability might not be there. It works for some people, doesn't work for others, but it's an impressive combination. It's impressive to see how far the platform went. We have an app store for the Apple TV, finally, and the second movie featuring the life of Steve Jobs. This one is much better, if you ask me, but still, it's okay. The open sourcing of Swift brings a very interesting spawning of new frameworks for the server side. So all of a sudden we have Perfect, Kitura, Zeo, Vapor, stuff that I know a little bit because I was teaching that in Swift Alps. John remembers that very well. And Swift, being part of the IBM strategy, Kitura is developed specifically by IBM, who has the secret plans of turning Swift into the next Java. 75% of devices are running iOS 9. By the end of December, finally, Swift is still on top, very much beloved, in spite of all the migration assistance. And we have a whole lot of iPhones right now, almost reaching 1 billion iPhones sold. 2016, Apple shuts off iAd, because basically nobody was buying it. WhatsApp registers 1 billion users, very impressive. We have the iPhone SE and the 9.7 iPad Pro being released, more movies of the MCU universe, and Apple celebrates 40 years. 40 years of staying relevant, for good or for worse, in the technological industry in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and 2010. In any case, a remarkable achievement and a very nice history to tell. Well, Instagram took a little bit of the money that Facebook gave it to change the icon, and we have dub16. That basically is still a lottery, and then you have a bingo when you get in. It's the year of Swift 3 and Xcode 8. Finally, we start to get a Swift version that actually begins to look stable and starts to take real good shape. We have the uniformization of the namings of the operating system. So we have watchOS, tvOS, iOS, macOS, Adrian OS, UIKonf18, and all the OSs that you can imagine. We have lots of new features in iOS 10, most importantly, some of those. And basically, we have in instruments a very nice leak memory reference cycle detector, which is actually quite useful. And finally, in September, Apple celebrates 1 billion iPhones. So we went from the million to the billion. It's quite impressive. iPhone 7 being released. The biggest feature being that it doesn't have a headphone jack. That was the biggest feature. You can forget about all of that. The biggest feature was the lack of headphone jack, because, courage. And basically, we have now and then we had, at the end of 2016, the machine that actually Pete Steinberger prefers, the new MacBook Pro, with Touch Bar, the butterfly keyboard, whatever that means, because, courage. So seriously, we have now as well the waterproof Apple Watch finally coming. Mozilla shuts off Firefox Os. Yeah, whatever. So we have, again, 75% of devices. The adoption rates are always incredible, because when you think about the numbers growing as they grow, now we have 1.03 billion at the beginning of 2017, 1.3 billion iPhones being sold. Of course, not all of them in usage, right? We have the release of the iPhone 7 last year, and Planet of the Apps. Remember that documentary from CNBC? Actually, Apple kept the idea of making a TV show with all the celebrities that had not died in 2016. That is will.i.am, Gwyneth Paltrow, I think, and a couple more. Well, Android decided to go Kotlin, which is an interesting move as well for the other platform. But it is the year of the App Store blues. A very strong article written by Matt Gemmell actually gives the state, the mood that we had last year around the App Store, about the lack of opportunities for small firms to actually make a living out of the App Store, the race to the bottom, the lack of engagement from users to actually support the lives of developers. It's a big problem. It's unsolved, as in my opinion, still. And we actually have a big problem around the App Store. I don't think Apple knows exactly how to solve it. I really don't know how you could solve it. The 9.7 iPad Pro turns into the 10.5, and 2017 is the first year that the total number of apps on the App Store did not grow. It actually decreased of 100,000 because there was a very big Apple crackdown, Apple app crackdown, and mostly guided because in WW17, which happened not in San Francisco but in San Jose, the new version of iOS, iOS 11, was actually 100% 64-bit only, which meant that Apple had to remove from the store all the applications that were only built with 32-bit, and also the antivirus and spamming apps and all of that. So the copycat apps and all of that got removed. The iOS 11 was an interesting release. As you can see, the Files app replaced the iCloud Drive, but it's interesting, but at the same time a bit poor. The only big announcement, the only two big announcements that we had is ARKit and Core ML. Lots of people are still experimenting with those features to see what we can do in the platform with those. We have the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 8 Plus, the first officially water-resistant iPhones, and of course the iPhone X, which many of you I've seen. And of course we all know what is the biggest feature of the iPhone 7. It is of course, the notch. That is the biggest feature of iOS 10. And no, of course, actually, the biggest feature as well is Craig Federighi making emojis on WWDC. We have 3 movies this time for the MCU. Really great. And, well, it's still selling like crazy. 1.25 billion devices sold, 2.1 million apps in the App Store. And then we reach this year. And this year, well, in about a couple of days, we're going to know. We're all going to watch the keynote, like we all do in our Apple TVs or on the web. It will happen in San Jose once again. It will be a lottery once again, of course. Maybe we're going to have these things. This is my humble prediction, and macOS 10 somewhere in California, because that's... I don't know, I'm discovering the geography of California through macOS, because every time there's a new release, I actually go to the map to see where is Maverick, like where is... We will have a new version of a beta. We have new movies for that thing, but in any case, we have 11 years. 11 years, all of these versions of iOS, a platform that grew incredibly fast, that had a lot of gates. You know, there was a crack gate, the overheat gate, the leak gate, the antenna gate, the yellow gate, the maps gate, band gate, YouTube gate, and Bluetooth gate. The last one I invented, but it's okay. But the iPhone really got us in terms of a device that is so personal to us that we become obsessed around it. And I wanted to mention as well the iPhone as a gaming platform, because this is something that is not to be overlooked. The titles that I'm mentioning here, and it's just a very quick assessment that I did looking on Google and DuckDuckGo. There are many more extremely good names, but Mountain Valley, Tap Tap Revenge, World of Goo, we all played these things, and of course the eponymous, the greatest Angry Birds, in my opinion. Hours lost playing Angry Birds on our iPhones. Right now, the adoption rate of iOS is very high, 76%. The oldest device, as I mentioned, is the iPhone 5S. This is the curve of the amount of devices sold per year. This is the cumulative amount, and you can see it's an asymptotic curve that has a limit, which is around 2 billion devices. Now, I guess it will pass at some point the mark of the 2 billion devices, but still, it has a very interesting behavior, this curve. And of course, I'm not counting iPod Touches, I'm not counting Apple TVs and Apple Watch, and Horace Dediu at some point said this is the most popular product of all time, all categories combined, without any doubt. But there's one more thing. I always wanted to put that slide. I always wanted. There's one more thing that I wanted to mention. And we all know the impact that the iPhone has had in the industry. Huge. You can see it in the mobile industry, of course. This is the cell phones before and after the introduction of the iPhone. But the most important thing for us is that we are the ones, with our applications, we have helped Apple sell iPhones. We have put our creations on the pockets of, in some cases, here, maybe millions of times. I think I've sold probably at most a couple thousand. I am super happy about that. I've been able to deploy my software to maybe 3,000 to 4,000 people around the world. And it's fantastic when you think about it. And those apps have had a tremendous impact in pretty much every aspect of our lives. And I mean this in the sense that many of the events that have been happening in the past 2 years, that I will not mention, you know exactly what I'm talking about, this acceleration in the rate of access to information, the hysteria that can generate all of the things that are happening around the world that sometimes you can see live because people are filming with their devices whatever is happening in the world. This is having an effect on how we vote, on how we buy, on how we entertain ourselves, on what we watch, on what we do. And this is where we have, I think, us software developers, we have a great power. We can influence with our ideas, with our biases, with our preconceptions, with our good intentions or bad intentions. We can have a strong effect on society. We actually have a strong effect on society. It's not can, it's a fact. And I think that it's a big, big, big responsibility because we are actually shaping the thoughts of the next generation. And it is our responsibility, I think, to use all of the kindness that we have, all of our empathy, all of our goodwill, all of our passion, all of the good taste for design to actually make accessible apps, inclusive apps, that take into account the needs of the people all over the world. And I think we are in a very privileged position, and in any case, I wanted to thank you because you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Great. Adrian.